Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. This episode is brought to you by Harrys.com and we've a great offer from them for you coming up later in the show. Now, if you're new to us, you may not know that we produce a number of other history-related podcasts as well. Angus, the other half at the History Network here, does his own podcast dedicated to World War II. Angus continues to produce 2 episodes monthly, and it's an eclectic mix of Second World War related topics. MacArthur was a notable episode, and his recent episode on the PBY Catalina flying boat is proving a popular one too, where Angus actually talks to a guy who owns a share in one and flies it. We also produce the podcast for Ancient Warfare magazine, so if ancient warfare is your thing, then why not have a listen along to that? And if wargaming is your thing, then we produce the Wargaming Soldiers and Strategy podcast, and in the latest episode, out Monday 3rd of October, the guys are looking at all things terrain. So you've plenty to keep your ears busy there, and all you need to do is head to www.thehistorynetwork.org and use the links there to access all these great podcasts. Incidentally, we've a nice big shiny donate button on the homepage at the site, and if you feel the urge, we would certainly welcome that most gratefully. Or if you want a bit more listening bang for your buck, then in the store at the website you can find our past seasons all packaged up as chaptered files for download. These seasons vary from between around 2.5 hours to over 5 hours, and they are just £2 each. Thanks for your continued support. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, Season 21, Episode 9, 12th Armoured Division, the Hellcats at Herrlisheim. The 12th Armoured Division set off from New York for the European Theatre of War on September 20th, 1944. They would spend November and December surging across northern France, encountering the enemy in Alsace and at the Maginot Line, liberating parts of France as they went. They were one of only 2 US Armoured Divisions to have African-American combat companies integrated into the division. They adopted the nickname Hellcats, symbolising their toughness and readiness for combat. They would meet their toughest opposition against German forces at Herrlisheim, part of Hitler's Operation North Wind. In January 1945, while the world's gaze was transfixed on the struggle for the Ardennes, the Germans launched an unexpectedly strong counter-offensive against the southern flank of the Allied line in Alsace. This series of attacks, which ran from the 31st of December 1944 through to 25th of January 45, came to be known as Operation Nordwind, or North Wind. On the 28th of December 1944, just 3 days prior to the operation's launch, Adolf Hitler declared to his division commanders, "This attack has a very clear objective, namely the destruction of the enemy forces. There is not a matter of prestige involved here. It is a matter of destroying and exterminating the enemy forces wherever we find them." The goal of the offensive was to break through the lines of the US 7th Army and French 1st Army in the upper Vosges Mountains and the Alsatian Plain and destroy them. This would leave the way open for Operation Dentist Unternehmen Zahnarzt, a planned major thrust into the rear of the US 3rd Army aiming to thus destroy it. The 12th Armoured Division completed their training in the autumn of 1944. In September, they set sail for England and would travel from Liverpool via Le Havre to join the European Theatre of War on the 11th of November. They then travelled up the Seine River to Rouen to join the 7th Army under Lieutenant General Alexander Patch. Advanced elements met the enemy near Weislingen in Alsace on the 5th of December, and the entire division moved against the Maginot Line fortifications 2 days later. As it advanced, the 12th Armoured Division liberated Rohrbach-les-Biches, and other towns surrounding Bettville were liberated by the 12th of December. On the 21st of December, Utweiler in Germany was seized. Then there ensued a short period of maintenance and rehab before the Hellcats moved forward against the Rhine bridgehead at Herrlisheim, part of Hitler's Nordwind offensive. However, in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge raged, and units of the 7th Army were diverted north to assist the 3rd Army in capturing Bastogne. Due to this, the remainder of the 7th Army, including the 12th Armoured Division, was stretched thin, holding 126 miles or 203 kilometres of front line with only 8 divisions. The Germans had been building up the Gamsheim bridgehead for quite some time, and on January the 7th, the 12th Armoured's Combat Command B arrived in the area, temporarily attached to the 79th Infantry. It was ordered to immediately prepare to attack the Germans in Herrlisheim. Herrlisheim, about 4 kilometres west of the river, was at the centre of the bridgehead. American forces held Ruhrville, 1 kilometre north of and across the Zorn River from Herrlisheim. Terrain and weather totally dominated the fighting around Herrlisheim. In January 1945, snow and heavy ground fog blanketed the region, neutralising Allied air superiority. The west bank of the Rhine River was poor tank country, flat and open with small clusters of woods, and crisscrossed by many small waterways, swollen with snow and ice. There was very little concealment. Any bridges still standing were well protected and under observation by the Germans. Also in this area in 1945, a 2-lane road, the D468, ran northeast, connecting Gamsheim, Herrlisheim and Drusenheim. A railroad line also ran along the eastern edge of Herrlisheim, and this railroad embankment provided perfect positions for German anti-tank guns facing west. The Steinwald, due north of Gamsheim, dominated the flat ground south of Herrlisheim. The flat, open plain, bounded by Herrlisheim in the north, Offendorf and the railroad embankment in the east, and the Steinwald in the south, formed a textbook-perfect armour kill zone. The Hellcats Combat Command B, or CCB, commanded by Colonel Charles V. Bromley, was offered the opportunity to attack from the south through French lines, and with the Rhine on its right flank this would have provided some protection. But Bromley decided to attack from the northwest, from Bischwiller, and through Ruhrville, which meant his left flank was vulnerable to the German positions in Drusenheim. Two factors weighed heavily against the 12th as it rolled toward the riverhead at Herrlisheim. 1. This definitely was not tank country. 2. The enemy's strength was underrated. What was thought to be a small force of inferior quality actually consisted of 2 divisions, the 10th SS Panzer and the 553rd Volksgrenadier, skillfully organised for defence. CCB attacked with 2 task forces in column. The armour-heavy rear element Task Force Rammer reached its assembly areas in Ruhrville at about 2 p.m. on January the 8th. Meanwhile, elements from the leading infantry heavy Task Force Power advanced southeast from Ruhrville to scout the bridge over the Zorn at Liberating. The scouts found the bridge intact in front of the Liberating waterworks complex, and they radioed back for the tanks to advance. They did not realise, however, that a second bridge, less than 100 metres down the road, had been blown, and all the division's Bailey bridges were still far in the rear. The American tanks quickly jammed up at Liberating, and CCB had to hastily modify its plan of attack. Deploying the tanks along the west bank of the Zorn for support, the 56th Armoured Infantry Battalion moved across the swollen river to take up positions along Kleinbach Creek. The American attack stalled as infantry units bunched up and became tangled. Although Company B of the 56th Armoured Infantry Battalion reached the Kleinbach at about dusk, they were later ordered to pull back to Liberating. That night there were at least 4 infantry companies packed into the waterworks buildings, and at about 3 a.m. mortar rounds began to fall on the waterworks. German troops infiltrated the buildings, and close-quarters fighting raged until daylight. Light tanks were used to evacuate the wounded back to Ruhrville along the road the GIs christened Purple Heart Lane. The Germans in Herrlisheim, meanwhile, continued to fight back. That night the Germans slipped more armoured vehicles and white-cloaked infantrymen into the town. By 3 a.m. on January the 10th, the 56th Armoured Infantry was effectively cut off. At dawn that morning, CCB attempted to move up several M8 self-propelled assault guns, but the vehicles crashed through the ice on the waterways and could not be recovered until after nightfall. Several light tanks made it into Herrlisheim that day, but they proved useless in the heavy building-to-building fighting. Later that day, the Bailey bridges finally arrived, and the Shermans of Company C, 714th Tank Battalion, 14th Armoured, prepared to charge across the Zorn to relieve the 56th Armoured Infantry. The attack was preceded by an artillery bombardment along the northern edge of the Steinwald. And we'll continue with the Hellcats at Herrlisheim in a moment, after I tell you about this great offer from our sponsors today, Harry's. Regular listeners may remember that Harry's have sponsored a few episodes before, and we're delighted to have them back. And they've got a great new offer for you, our listeners. You know, I've been using Harry's shaving products since we first hooked up with them, and I've never looked back or wanted to change who supplies my blades. For me, it's like some care and thought has actually gone into these products. The razor handle feels good in the hand, the blades don't get clogged, and I get a fantastic shave every time. And with one of Harry's plans, you can even get your blades delivered regularly to your door. What's even greater now is that Harry's are keeping their prices exactly the same. Harry's 5-blade razors now include a softer flex hinge for a more comfortable glide, trimmer blade for hard-to-reach places, lubricating strip, and a textured handle for more control when it's wet. And they still work out at just $2 a blade compared to $4 or more you'll pay at the drugstore. By owning the factory in Germany where they make the blades, Harry's can produce these high-quality razors themselves and sell them online for half the price of competitors. So Harry's is so confident in the quality of their blades, they'll send you their popular free trial set, which comes with a razor, 5-blade cartridge and shaving gel, free when you sign up for a shaving plan. Just pay shipping. Plus, there's a special offer for fans of this show. Enter the code HISTORY at checkout to get a post-shave balm added to your order absolutely free. So just go to harrys.com right now and enter the code HISTORY at checkout to claim your free trial set and post-shave balm. That's harrys.com, checkout code HISTORY to receive these great free offers. Thanks so much. The Herrlisheim fighting continued back and forth for days. On the cold morning of January the 17th, 1945, 12th Armoured Division's 43rd Tank Battalion prepared to renew the previous day's unsuccessful attack on German positions around Herrlisheim. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Nicholas Novosel, was overheard telling another officer, "Mayor, you're a lucky SOB. I think we're not coming back from this one." Novosel's premonition would prove all too right for many of his men. With preparations done, it was now the morning of January the 19th. The 10th SS Panzer and 22nd SS Panzer Grenadier Regiments launched strong westward attacks from both the Offendorf and Gamsheim. The Germans' attack started to make headway, but fortunately for the American defenders, the weather began to clear, allowing Allied air assets to respond immediately with 190 sorties, dropping more than 100 tons of ordnance in the Herrlisheim-Offendorf area. Despite the pounding from Allied aircraft, the German attacks continued, and north of Herrlisheim the Germans pushed across the Zorn and almost overran CCB's command post in Ruhrville. As Clarks and other personnel started to panic and prepared to evacuate the area, Colonel Bromley shouted out, "Stop this goddamn panic! We're not retreating anywhere. We're defending this command post. We're holding this line. We're soldiers. We have weapons. We're expendable." The American line held, but the 12th Armoured was in a precarious position at nightfall on January the 19th. During the last 11 days, the division had taken more than 1,250 casualties and lost 70 combat vehicles. Divisional artillery was down to less than 50 rounds per battalion, enough for just 5 minutes of sustained firing. Relief finally came when the 6th Corps ordered the 36th Infantry Division to assume the 12th Armoured's positions. The 10th SS Panzer attempted to exploit its victory to the west of the town, but it was their turn to take heavy losses as the Hellcats slowly withdrew, and by the 22nd of January the area passed to the control of the French First Army for operations south of Strasbourg. To this day there remains some confusion as to the fate of Colonel Novosel and the 43rd Tank Battalion. On the night of January the 18th, a German radio broadcast reported the capture of an American battalion commander and 300 of his men at Herrlisheim, as well as the destruction or capture of 50 tanks. Novosel did not have that many tanks to start with, but the number would be about right if it included the tanks of the 23rd Tank Battalion. In sharp contrast, the US Army's official history, Riviera to the Rhine, cites a February 23, 1945 US Graves registration report stating some 28 destroyed tanks of the 43rd Tank Battalion were later recovered, as were the bodies of the battalion commander and many of his men. Ironically, the German broadcast was correct. The July 7th, 1945 edition of the Hellcat News, the 12th Armoured Division's newspaper, carries a report of a letter written by Novosel from a hospital in Michigan where he had been sent after his liberation from a German prisoner of war camp. He had been wounded 17 times before being captured at Herrlisheim. His tank was hit by a mortar round just as he was attempting to radio CCA for the last time. Novosel noted, "I was hit at about 2 and don't remember much after that. The rest held out until 5 or 6. This was the Hellcats' toughest and costliest fight. Approximately 1,700 reinforcements were required to bring the division back to normal strength. The 12th acquired its combat seasoning in that battle. Never was it to be stopped, seldom slowed down. Corporal James G. Lighthizer Humboldt, SD 66th Armoured Infantry Battalion, assault gun driver, and Sergeant Howard Gum, New York City gun commander, won the division's first Distinguished Service Crosses in the Herrlisheim action. The two men, along with Corporal Peter Sully and PFC Albert Chait, both from Brooklyn and 66th HQ Company, left a sheltered position to fire their howitzer on 3 German Tiger tanks, which held up Company B's withdrawal. By distracting the Nazi armour, this allowed the beleaguered company to pull back from positions it had held against relentless attacks for 6 days. 2 direct hits silenced the assault gun and mortally wounded Gum, Sully and Chait. Lighthizer made his way to safety after determining his buddies were beyond help. The crew was credited with saving the entire company from annihilation or capture. Sully and Chait were awarded the Silver Star posthumously. The badly battered town of Herrlisheim was finally liberated on the 31st of January by the United States Army as the Germans retired after the overall failure of their Operation Northwind offensive. During its deployment, the 12th Armoured Division captured 72,243 prisoners of war. Among them were Adolf Eichmann and Werner von Braun. Nearly 8,500 Allied POWs, including 1,500 Americans and an additional 20,000 non-military prisoners, were liberated by the Hellcats. Would you like to write a script for us? Many of our most popular episodes have been written by listeners. So why not drop us a line with an idea for your script? info@thehistorynetwork.org. And it's the same address if you just want to suggest a topic for us to cover sometime in the future. Do go along to the website www.thehistorynetwork.org, where you'll find all the information about those other podcasts we produce, which I told you about at the beginning of the show. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, researched and read by Nick Barker.